Looks pretty bad, doesn't it? Kind of makes you wonder what kind of destruction hit this place, right? Well, up until about 1988, 89, this was a dairy of merit. This was a beautiful farm. I actually worked on this farm. I grew up with the kid that grew up here, went to school with him. But his family wasn't the first ones to farm this place. The original family that had a dairy here were from Germany. They were German immigrants. In the late 1800s, about 1890, 1880, they bought this piece of ground and started a dairy farm here. Back then, farming was a lot different, right? They started a dairy farm here. When they were done farming, the farm got sold again. About 1910, 1920s, it was sold to another family called the De Hoogs. The De Hoog family farmed it. And keep in mind, this was over 100 acres when the De Hoogs had it. Through time, it was dwindled down to about 87 acres to farm. De Hoogs farmed it. In those days, they didn't have milk tanks. They had milk cans. The original milk house was right there. Now that's a milk house now. That's the end of the parlor. That big hole in the wall, the first big hole, was where the milk tank used to sit. This place is, anyway, the original milk house stood right there. That eve of that barn was built in the 20s and the 30s. The barn over on the far end is the tail end of the second barn that was built. The original barn is back in behind it. That barn is probably over 100 years old now. The house, it wasn't fancy, but it was a modest home. It was a farmer's home. That's the original house across the street. Back then, this road wasn't all that big. But that's the original house. They were German immigrants that built this farm. That's the second house on the place. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is because this was a functional dairy farm. It was a really nice farm, dairy of merit. In order to get dairy of merit, you have to have, your farm has to be clean and kept up. Has to be in good condition, manicured. Your cows have to be healthy. Your milk production has to be up high, and your milk has to be of good quality. No bugs, no problems. That's how you get dairy of merit. Well, this family had farmed this. They moved here in the late 60s. They raised 2 daughters and a son here, this old farmer and his wife. They're Dutch descent, but they moved here from California. They bought this place in 1968. You see the eave of that old barn, that old building there? That was a chicken coop. In that time, somewhere along in the early 60s, sometime in the early 80s, he was still farming this. This looks like brush. This used to be a cornfield, all the way down to the end of the road. Used to be their property. Used to be cornfield. Border Patrol. So this family had this farm going here, and about the mid-'80s, the environmentalists started taking a death grip on the county. They started hitting this family up. They started fining him. They said that these ditches, this is one of many that cuts across, this one just circles the place, but this is one of many that cuts across the property. And they said there was too much cow manure in these ditches. He couldn't spread manure on his fields for the corn, right? Fertilize the cornfield. So in the early 80s, the government stepped in and said, hey, we need to do a better way of collecting the manure. So they came to this old farmer. He was one of them that they came to, many of them in this county. And the government says, we will subsidize you to put in a lagoon or a manure pit, a tank. You could scrape your barn out into this tank. It would contain it, and then once a year you can pump it out, or twice a year you can pump it out. We'll subsidize to build these things for you. A lot of farmers went for it. Hey, it's upgrading the farm. We'll do it. They didn't tell them that doing this was going to open them wide open to a whole bunch of crap. Because within 5 years or so of them doing these liquid manure tanks and lagoons, the one for this farm, by the way, would have been right through between the barns. The scraping pad was right there where that white tarp is right there. That was a scraping pad. There was a huge slab out the back of that barn. But 5 years after putting all this in, they started hitting the people up, hitting these farmers up. Now they have to have a permit to have a lagoon or have a manure pit because it's hazardous material. Now they got to pay for a permit just to have the thing on their property when the government themselves subsidized to put it on. Within time, they had to apply for a permit to pump it. The government would step in and tell them when they can and cannot pump their lagoons. Meanwhile, they're still testing the ditches. Oh, you got too much runoff into our ditches. You're killing the fish. You're polluting the environment. We're going to fine you for this. We're going to fine you for that. That's what they're hitting, what they hit this old guy with. I won't tell you the family's name because him and his wife still live in the local area and they're well into their 80s now. Their son, who's the same age as I am, I went to school with him, he's had some serious health issues lately. But this farm was to be passed to him because he was healthy back then. Somebody came in and tore the windows out of the house. Now they put up all this crap so that nobody can come in here now. But at one time, this was a beautiful farm. They basically permitted and fined this farmer out of existence. What he did was, we had a buyout that came to the state. Several buyouts. The buyout that he took, they would buy out your entire herd. Now this is the government using your tax dollars. They will buy out your entire herd. They will pay you your average milk check to sell your herd. They would pay you that check 12 months for a year not to produce milk. And your cows had to be destroyed. They didn't go into the beef. They didn't go into another herd. They had to be destroyed. The government did that with your tax dollars, paying farmers not to milk cows. He was already buried in debt because the government was hitting him with fines and permits. It was his way out. So he went on it. A new player steps in. The Port of Bellingham. The Port of Bellingham now, they step back and they, we got all this open land. We'll buy it all up. We'll buy it all up. The Port of Bellingham is actually about 60 miles from here. You would think now, if you go on the Port of Bellingham's website, you see how they're helping the yacht club, and they're controlling pollution in the Bellingham Harbor. And one of their medals, badges of honor, is they shut down Georgia Pacific Sawmill because it was polluting. What's the port doing buying land out here in the farthest northern point of Whatcom County? So it made more sense to them to buy out this farm and then destroy it. The house had been rented out. The Port of Bellingham rented the house out to several different families throughout. They were, lowlifes mostly. The house was never honored or respected. Now look, it's trashed. That was the living room right there. I laid on that living room floor as a kid and watched TV and played with their son. It was a beautiful farm. And this is what's left. This is what allowing the Port of Bellingham, allowing environmentalists to control your land. This is what happens. So I'm going to show you the rest of it. I got to do some driving. This is the main part of the farm. This was the house and the barns. Okay? And you see this big fence around it. This is something new. They had the no trespassing signs. I don't know what they're digging in there. There's a hole here. They had the no trespassing signs, but the house was still pretty much intact. Now I come by and they got this fence up all the way around it, and the house has been vandalized even more, brutalized. The barn has been brutalized even more. That was state-of-the-art milking parlor. This guy only milked like 80 cows, maybe 100. It was a small farm. This place across the street, this was the original house to the farm. But in time it was separated from it and a second house was built. Now, I'm going to show you what the Port of Bellingham thinks is a better idea to use this land. Keep in mind, they ran this farmer out of business. They ran this farmer out of business because his farm was polluting the soil, polluting the environment. Okay? Port of Bellingham runs this place now. Now I'll show you what they think is better. Keep in mind, all this was open fields at one time. All this brush, all this crap, this was all open fields. This is all part of that farm at one time. Now I'll show you the backside of the farm and the neighbors to the farm. This is Whatcom County's tax dollars at work. The first thing I'm going to show you here, there's going to be a couple of other points I'm going to hit on with this. I can't go onto this property. There's actually guys here working today. But there is a backstory to it. Okay. That's the name of the place. It's a Canadian-owned company. It's a Canadian-owned company. This is a Canadian-owned company, but they don't own the land. The land is owned by the Port of Bellingham. Now, you see those dumpsters? They come from Canada. They come down here on the back of trucks. There's great big trucks. And they got these big forklifts that pick these off the trucks and stack them on those train cars. These dumpsters are full of British Columbia garbage. Canadian garbage. So these dumpsters take all of the Canadian garbage and they haul them here into the States. Canada, see that mountain? Canada is just on the other side of that. The Canadian border is just on the other side. This road here comes from Canada. You follow this road into the town of Sumas, and at the end of this road, you're going to come to an intersection. If you take a left, you go right to the Sumas border. They haul this garbage in, and they take it off these trucks, and they put it on these rail cars. And these rail cars full of Canadian garbage go to one landfill, I'm told, is in Montana. Another landfill, I'm told, is in Idaho somewhere. These are shipped out of state into other states to be dumped into American landfills. This is Canadian garbage. So if you're anywhere near Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, even parts of Oregon, you will see these train cars. These train cars are full of Canadian garbage. And there are miles and miles and miles of them. Now the backstory. 6 years ago, there was a company that wanted to come in here. They wanted to start a coal yard out at Cherry Point. If you look at the map of Washington State and you see Cherry Point, it is a peninsula reaching out. And it's right on the border of the ocean and Canada. Cherry Point has multiple refineries out there. There is all kinds of open ground that can't be farmed, it can't be housed because it's too close to refineries. A coal company wanted to start a reload yard out there, bring in the coal trains, dump their coal, and then from that reload yard, they would load that coal onto barges and sell it to foreign countries. It's the American way. Except one problem. At the time, the coal was shooting straight through Washington State and going up into Canada. The Canadians are buying it for nickels on the dollar and then reloading it onto barges and selling it to China and Japan at a profit, cutting out the United States. We were literally stealing ourselves blind. But it was okay because for them to shut down that train because it was bad for the environment. That coal train coming through Washington State would be bad for the environment. It would pollute the environment. It'd pollute our water, it'll block our highways. All that coal dust will pollute the land. We can't have the coal trains. So they killed the coal train. That would have provided over 500 jobs in Washington State alone. And it would have kept American dollars in America. They killed the coal train. But this is okay. Hauling Canadian garbage into the United States and reloading it in the United States and sending it into the United States to fill American landfills. This is okay. I can't take you over there and show you the film that's floating on top of that mud puddle out there. But you can see the garbage laying around in there. There's lots of garbage laying in there. Where do you think that goes? It goes right into them creeks and them ditches. Remember, where I first stopped, where I started this video, is right over there. That's in front of the house. And I'll show you some more. Oh yeah, look at that. That's more of the garbage train. Those are cars getting ready to be shipped out. They're full of garbage. See, that's a forklift right there that loads it. Oh shit, that thing broke again. Okay. Where's my key? Anyway. So it was bad to have the coal train because that's bad for the environment. It's bad to have a dairy farm because that's bad for the environment. But it's okay. It's okay to have a reload yard for garbage. See, now that's the machine that takes it off the trucks, the forklift. And that puts it on the train cars. That's a truck with one of them sitting on it. Those trucks come down from Canada and haul in these dumpsters, and they're full of Canadian garbage, and they load them on those train cars. Okay? That's okay. That's okay to do that. I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's a guard or somebody sitting there. I don't know what the hell it is. There's more of the train cars, more of the dumpsters. See? They not only reload garbage here, there's something that they're dumping into these bladders, and they reload them. All this through here was all part of that farm. The railroad tracks had been here all along, but the farm had learned how to cross the tracks, and they had spots that they'd cross it. They worked with the railroad to get their cows back and forth, or get their machinery, their equipment back and forth. All this was cornfield. All of this was cornfield at one time. Part of that farm. Now look. Now look at what it is. This is better for the environment than a dairy farm. Okay? That's how the government sees it. That's the backside of this once beautiful farm. That's how the government sees it. That this is way better. Tail end of that barn, that's an add-on to the original barn. That right there, that yellow building, that was a corn silage bunker. And then he had some dry cow stalls in there. Behind that red Connex, you would be looking right up one feeder alley. There was a feeder down the middle with stalls on both sides, and they scraped straight into it. At the end of this gravel driveway here, just before you get to the concrete slab, that was the manure tank. There was a lagoon right here. All that's been tore out. This is what the Port of Bellingham does. I don't know what this shit is. Now the guys that run this, the guy that runs this yard, that owns the business here, him and his partners, they're all Canadians. All Canadians. They will never own the land. The land belongs to the port, but they will pay the port a rent, a lease on this. Basically, they're paying for the right to destroy the environment, but that's okay, because this is better than that dairy farm putting manure out on a field. This is way better. This isn't productive land anymore. This was all cleared land. This was all cleared land when I was a kid. The last time I was on this place, it was a functional dairy, and that was in 1985. By 1987, 88, the old man had had enough, and he went on to buy out. He couldn't fight them anymore. And this is what we got now. Now I'll show you the rest of what used to be their farm, so you understand the brutality that our government is willing to do to the land, as long as they get their fee. This is the train waiting for them cars to get loaded. Now this is the other side of the tracks, and this was all part of that farm. Now this is a laydown yard for a reload yard across the street. There's the reload yard. When they reload train cars here. All that lumber gets hauled in by truck, and then it gets reloaded onto train cars and sent into the United States. Okay? I'm sitting probably about 3 feet above the original ground level because of all this gravel hauled in here. You can't just drive around with forklifts and lumber trucks in a cornfield. So they hauled in all this pit run. Now, to help you kind of see where we're at here, that's where we just were at. You can kind of see them gray tanks we were looking at. That's the other side of the tracks. You see the roof of the bunker, corn bunker. We're right exactly across the tracks from it all. This has been a laydown yard, but the Port of Bellingham wants to use it for something else now, so they kicked the reload yard out of here. Now the reload yard is not part of the farm. There was always an empty lot there, but since I was a kid, since I can remember, there's always been a reload yard there. But all this over here was cornfield. All this over here was part of the farm. Now, this next to the reload yard over there is a planer mill. It's a Canadian-owned company. They bring in lumber that's been kiln dried. And they take it over there to that planer, and that's where it gets planed and bundled, and then they sell it from there. A lot of it goes back up into Canada. Now, this is built up. See, that company is building their own kilns. This is all the construction waste and bits and pieces of the kiln going in. Now, this is the backside of that farm. This would have been the back 50, 60 acres of that farm. The state stepped in and said in order for them to build their kilns here, they had to build up the ground 7 feet. See this? It goes all the way down. That's the original ground level. The cornfield is the original ground level. That's the farm over there. I cut corn silage out of this field. We bucked bales out of that field. They built all this up because, you know, we got to get it out of the floodplain, all that happy horseshit. So the planer mill, before they even could begin to build their kilns, They had to do environmental impact. And they had to build all this up, burying a cornfield. This is better for the environment. This is better than any dairy farm would be on the environment. So now we got a destroyed house is being vandalized that once had been a farm for almost 100 years. We got that farm destroyed. We got garbage reload, Canadian garbage being reloaded and sent into landfills. And that's, the side note is, that's on the tails of them saying we can't have a coal train. The coal train would have provided work. The garbage reload place, I think they have like maybe 7 employees. Why is Canadian garbage coming into my town and then being loaded on train cars and sent to somebody else's town? Now the port owns all this land that I'm showing you. This cornfield, this site, that reload. I'm going to show you the planer mill next. The Port of Bellingham owns all this, but when you go on their website, it doesn't say anything about this land that the port owns. Their website only talks about what they're doing out on the actual port. Doesn't say anything about the Port of Bellingham owning anything out here in the county. Okay? See that? That's all fill. That's all fill. Now I'm showing you this and I'm making a big deal out of this because I want to show you this. This is all fill. Now, they hayed this field just last summer, and then they started building all this stuff. See that berm? There's a berm right there. Big old berm. But this is the main reason. Some of you know what this is. This is called a retainer pond. Keep in mind, this was all hayfield. Okay? This, by the way, is the planer mill. This was not part of the farm. The farm's property was on this side of the road. Because they had to build that up, to build those kilns, and that's all port property. This also is port property. But because they had to build all that up, they had to dig a retainer pond, because now all that built up is going to have runoff and floodwaters, you know. $287,000 of taxpayer dollars were spent building this pond and the berms around it. That's all junk that's supposed to be part of the kiln. This is our tax dollars at work. This. $287,000 of taxpayers' dollars to build a retainer pond because they wanted to build a kiln on what used to be part of somebody's farm. The government stole the farm nefariously. Well, here comes a cop. I'm going to have some questions to answer, I'm sure. Nope, he kept going. Huh, I'm surprised he kept going. Sumas cops are like little Barney Fife. They only carry one bullet. That way, if they get in a tight spot, they can shoot themselves. Anyway, now this is all corn. This was all part of that farm. Even this road that I'm on right now, their property ended at the edge of that road. This road was added later. They call it the truck road. It's so that the trucks coming from Canada can shoot straight down to ICO, which is, they make asphalt roof shingles. Okay. Yes, they make asphalt roof shingles here. But if you go on the far edge of their property, you'll see all the waste and their garbage that the wind has blown out into the fields that they're calling wetlands now. See, somebody corned all this at one time. They've been renting it, but the port still owns it. And eventually they will have Canadian businesses built in here. This is the United States. This is Sumas, Washington. But this will all be filled with Canadian businesses. That's a Canadian business. This all here is 2 separate Canadian businesses. Okay. When I was a kid, this was a dairy farm. That would have been the driveway to one of the barns, to the big barn. This was a Vandermillen farm. They went on the buyout. The port jumped in and bought it up. It sat empty for a while. Canadian money came in, built a kiln and planer mill here. Then next door to it is another planer mill for cedar. This is ICO Roofing. They employ about 200 people here. But it's all Canadian owned. That's D. Jager Farm over here. This was the D. Jager Farm. And I worked for this old boy. I hated this field between us right here when I was a kid. Port owns all this. Port of Bellingham owns all this. Now that building over there, I'll come over, let me get to the end of the road here. I don't know how well you can see it, but that's the back side of the Border Patrol and Customs building. That was part of this farm, D. Jager Farm. Keep in mind, the port owned all this. The only ones that can do any business out here is the port. They sold that tract of land to Homeland Security and Border Patrol. In 2015, 2016, that metal shed there, if you're looking at it, that's a garage, and you see a bunch of Border Patrol vehicles in there. Well, in 2016, that garage and the parking lot behind it, which is between us and that side road coming around the far side of it, all of that through there, all right? There were these off-white Humvees. No markings. I sat here and looked at them with binoculars. There was no license plates on them, and there was no markings on them. And there was probably, rough guess, 60 or 70 of them, all lined up there. They came in through the port, through the reload, and then they got trucked over through into there. And then shortly after that, they were gone. They sat there for about, not quite a month, 3 weeks, and were gone. That was D. Jager Farm. So D. Jager Farm, Vandermeulen Farm, went on to buy out the first buyout. And then when their buyout period was over, instead of going back into dairying, they sold their land, and the best one to sell it to was the Port of Bellingham. So all of this, all of this, all of that, all of that, clear over there, is all owned by the Port of Bellingham. These businesses here, they own the business, they own the buildings, they own the equipment, they don't own the land. They have to keep paying the Port of Bellingham lease on the land here. Now keep in mind, the Port of Bellingham got this land because they harassed the farmers so bad with penalties and fines and permits that they couldn't afford to farm no more. And the biggest reason was they were polluting the environment. That was polluting the environment. So they harassed these farmers to the point that they could not make a living anymore farming their land. So they sell it. And who steps up to buy it? A government agency, the Port of Bellingham. That government agency buys it off of them and turn it into the garbage that you see now. Now, we're looking at what had been part of that dairy farm. This business here was actually sold while the farmer was still farming. He was trying to pay the debt that the government had piled on him. So this blue building here is actually an electric and plumbing business. He sold this corner to them, trying to gain up money to pay all the fines and fees that were dumped on him for having a field, having cows on his property. This is all waste. And in the winter, right over there is the roofing place. In the winter, you see their funny colored sand blown in piles, drifts all through the weeds through here. Now this piece of ground here that we're looking at, see there's the reload yard over there with the garbage trucks, right? This is the only piece that's left to be able to farm, that's left of that farm. It's all owned by the port. It's all owned by the port. But there's some farmers around here locally that will lease this land from the port now, so they can green chop it, hay it. Maybe they'll have a cornfield out here next year. But you see all this waste piles, that's a waste pile in there. That's where all that brush there comes from. Now you're looking at these fields and you see how these fields look. We're going to go around this corner here. We're looking at the far edge of that old dairy farm. We go around this corner here and we're going to be looking at the other edge of the road, the corner that I told you about. They wanted it to be wetlands, they made it wetlands. So all this that I'm showing you looked like this. It was all open fields, workable open fields. See? They cut silage here, except they dug the ditch bigger down the middle of the field and all the waste ended up in a big pile. That's what all them dead weeds and shit out there and the blackberries, see all that? That's a new ditch that the port had dug for the environmentalists, because they did this. It goes from a nice lush field to this. All this was all the same field. It was all the same field. But they dug out, they came in and they dug off the top foot of the topsoil, dug it out, hauled it off somewhere. And then they came in, they planted their willows. They made it a wetland. It wasn't swampy out here. It was viable, workable field. They made it wetland so they can have an excuse to destroy a dairy farm. And see, now we're back to the farm. Back to the farm. Back to this once beautiful family dairy farm. So what I'm showing you, what I showed you tonight or this afternoon is bigger powers that be, bigger powers than people we elected, call the shots in this state. They took a viable family dairy farm. What is more wholesome than a family dairy farm? A beautiful place. They had pride here. This place was beautiful. This little circle here had rose bushes and had all kinds of flowers in there. And there was even an old wagon, old horse-drawn wagon for decoration. The milk truck would come in the driveway right over here. The milk truck would come in that driveway and swing around and stop right here. And it would pick up the milk out of the milk tank right there. And then drive out this driveway. The port wanted the land. The port decided they could make more money for themselves if they could run this guy off his land. So they ran him off, made it so he couldn't afford to live here anymore, couldn't afford to farm here anymore. They ran him off. Nickels on the dollar. So they could step in and basically rape the land. Turned a good, lush cornfield, silage field, pasture for the cows, turned into this. Splitting the farm down the middle and then selling the back half off to Canadian businesses. Americans don't benefit from this. Americans don't benefit from this. Canadians do. A foreign country does. So they ran the man off, citing that his cows were polluting these drain ditches. Drain ditches that were dug over 100 years ago to drain the land so it could be farmed. They step in, they take the land from them. Port of Bellingham takes control of it. But if you go on and you try to look and find out the Port of Bellingham, how much holdings they have, they don't talk anything about any of this kind of stuff. And this is not an isolated incident. This is one piece of ground, one farm in Whatcom County that this has happened to. But you go on the Port of Bellingham's website and you look at their holdings and you won't see anything about these dairy farms being overtaken like this. So I try to research how much land they own. They do cite that Goshen Land Trust manages many of their holdings. So you look at Goshen Land Trust. Goshen Land Trust is just what they said. They are a land trust. They manage properties. They manage properties to be farmed, to be turned into wetlands. Some of the higher ground up in the mountains as you get into the foothills for logging. They're not supposed to own it. I'm telling you this for a reason. I'll get to it here in a minute. See, there's what's left. I don't know if you can see it, but there's what's left of a fish trap. That was a fish ladder. This is one of the older ditch lines through here. There was no swamp in here. I've been through these fields. There was no swamp out here. I swear it to you. They made it a wetland. They made it a swamp. So if you go through and you try to research how much they actually own, what's their holdings on this, and you won't see anything about these places. I'll see there. That's a natural protected area. So they use Goshen Land Trust to maintain and manage their properties. Okay, you go and look at Goshen Land Trust and you see that they are just that, a land trust. They're just like the land trust in Idaho, the land trust in Montana, the land trust in Oregon, the land trust here in Washington State. And there's a couple of them here. There's Goshen Land Trust or Skagit Land Trust. Those are the biggest ones. Oh, look at there. Oh, he got ran over, I think. Yep. Don't see them very often, but that one got ran over. So I went to looking for Goshen Land Trust, and I couldn't see that they said anything about this. They said talk about the Bellingham Port, how they're protecting the environment with their new park. And they ran Georgia Pacific out of business. That's how they're protecting the environment. This is how they're protecting the environment. Turning into swamps. Now, you go and look who owns the most land in Whatcom County. And you'll see that it's Goshen Land Trust. And it's an outfit called DNR, Department of Natural Resources. If you look to see how much land they actually own, they don't actually own any land at all, because they are taxpayer funded and also through private donations, and then money that DNR and Goshen can extort out of ranchers, farmers, and loggers. Extort. When I say extort, I mean extort. They come in, they tag a bill on you, and they will use the full extent of the law to retrieve that bill. If you do not pay what they demand, they will arrest you. They will take all of what you own. You'll go to prison. Well, who's that sound like? Bureau of Land Management, maybe? So DNR, you can see a little bit of their holdings. DNR says they only own 5.6 million acres in Washington State. They only own. But then when you go on their web, you go and look up their thing, it says that they own no properties, they own no holdings here. They are just managers. They are just caretakers to keep hunters and loggers out of taxpayer land. You go up there to use it, our tax dollars paid for it, you go up there to use it, and there'll be a great big gate there, and you'll see a big no trespass sign by order of the United States Forestry Department, or United States this, or United States that. We are the United States. And I don't remember me telling me I can't go in there. It's my money. I paid for it. Our tax dollars paid for all this. Our tax dollars bought all this. But we can't use it. So here's a little tidbit. United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. The federal government shall never own title to any real properties which is not specifically authorized by the Constitution, such as parks, forests, dams, waterways, and grazing, without the consent of the state where same is located. This man paid his taxes. This man paid every fee that was ever given to him that he had to pay. Even if constitutionally he did not owe it, he still paid it. This man did everything he was supposed to do. And he ran him out of business. The state gave themselves permission to do this to his farm. The state gave themselves permission to break the Constitution. That's what happened. Now, my personal vendetta is, I'm 5th generation in this county. I love this county. My hometown is only 7 miles away from here, Everson. My great-grandpa helped build the city hall there. His handprints are in the city hall there. This is my county. These are my people. But our own government is our biggest enemy. Now, I just gave you a tour of one incident, one place. But this is one of many within my county that's been hit by this. The environmentalists that screamed and yelled and cried and set up all these regulations that made it possible for our government to take this man's farm from him would have an absolute calf if they knew what was being done to the land now. And this has nothing to do with protecting the environment. Everything to do with making money for a government that will shoot you dead, just like they did Lavoy Finicum. Just wanted to share this with you. I hope it wasn't too long and boring. Probably was boring as hell, huh? But I hope it opens your eyes up. My gripe is they destroyed a family farm. And then they put in all this, which is harder on the environment, harder on the land, no respect for the land. But because there was more money to be made for the Port of Bellingham and for DNR and for outfits like Goshen, it was okay to destroy a family farm and put all this in. The side note is, this is the gift that keeps giving, because this garbage goes into even farther into the United States to pollute somebody else's farm, somebody else's ranch. Just wanted to share it with y'all. This has been chewing on me for a while. I know these people personally. The guy that owns this, I actually worked for him once, and he's not very nice to work for. He's a prick. There you go. That was my spew. Y'all have a good day.